Professor Latham, this would put America on a sticky wicket because the world is watching this very, very closely. But I'll come to tariffs in just a moment. The meeting in Alaska, the fact that President Putin said we are close neighbors, though separated by the Strait of Bering, no summit for over 4 years, ties were at its lowest since the Cold War, and that's not good. But the point that he raised, Professor Latham, the fundamental threat to Russian security, that needs to be addressed. The people of Ukraine are brotherly. Events a tragedy and great pain even for Russia. Is that an indication that Russia is friendly with the people of Ukraine? It's the regime that President Putin wanted to paint in a corner.
I think that's the narrative that President Putin would like the world to buy. And it's not without historical justification. The borders are, as are all European borders, very artificial and product of history, product of war in the past, product in this case of Stalin simply arbitrarily redrawing the internal boundaries of the Soviet Union at one point in the 1950s and taking Crimea out of Russia and putting it in Ukraine quite arbitrarily. So there's that going on here. But there's a slightly bigger picture here as well, which is that the Europeans, I think, are exaggerating the Russian threat. I think after these 3 years of war, the Russian people and the Russian government and the Russian military have had enough. They're exhausted. It's not like they're going to get a ceasefire on their terms, favorable to Russia, in Ukraine, and then turn on Sweden or Poland or the Baltics. It seems inconceivable. And yet this is a very live fear in many European capitals, especially those that border on Russia. So it is a European issue in that respect, although it doesn't need to be. It could be treated as, here's the real problem. There are two issues, one of which is Russia's geopolitical imagination, which always includes Ukraine and Russia in the same political unit. But the other one, which people in Europe have ignored and have refused to face, is that as NATO has crept closer and closer and closer to Russia, Russian security anxieties have gone up and up and up, finally through the roof. And the straw that broke the proverbial camel's back was when the U.S. started talking about bringing Ukraine into NATO. That is intolerable from a national security perspective from Moscow's viewpoint. And so it's hardly surprising when you put those two things together, this imagined history, let's just call it that, of unity of these two peoples, plus the fear generated by NATO expansion and NATO expansion and NATO expansion. It's hardly surprising that Vladimir Putin lashed out the way he did. Lots of blame to go around here.
Indeed, and we will talk about who should shoulder that responsibility or be blamed for that bogey. President Trump did speak about another bogey. It's that Russian interference in American elections bogey, and he said that hoax kept that relationship from moving forward in his first term. And subsequently, President Putin spoke of the relationship being at its lowest during Biden era, which shouldn't have been. But Ambassador Dayal, before I bring in Rohit into this conversation, one, do you see the relationship move forward, or will there be an intense pushback from Europe and from Ukraine? How do you see Ukraine reacting to this? President Zelensky was, he kept tweeting till very late at night when this conversation was happening. No reaction just as yet. But would he heave a sigh of relief, or would he be very, very worried that he may just be hung out to dry?
As regards Ukraine's reaction, let me state that Zelensky had always totally rejected the idea of making any territorial concessions or ceding any territory. Yes. You'd recall that in a video address after President Trump had announced his forthcoming meeting with Putin, Zelensky had said that Ukraine is also ready to work together with President Trump, but he had vowed that his people will not give up their land to the occupier. And Zelensky had also said that any decisions which are against us, any decisions that are without Ukraine, are also decisions against peace. So he has been very consistent in making clear his opposition to this sort of meeting that was taking place between President Trump and President Putin. And the expectations in Europe were never very high. But of course, there was a degree of concern whether something could be worked out behind their backs. The fact of the matter is that this meeting has made it very clear that bringing about any kind of a ceasefire is going to be very, very difficult.
You know, in a moment from now, I will put out those two images. In February, when President Zelensky had traveled to the United States of America, the treatment he got, almost maybe described as the belt treatment in the Oval Office, the manner in which President Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance went after Zelensky, and the treatment and the red carpet that was rolled out for President Putin.